Breaking. Prince William walked out on Keir Starmer in the middle of a state briefing, and what he said as he left has detonated the most serious constitutional firestorm Britain has seen in half a century. It happened 3 days ago. What was meant to be a routine conversation about Commonwealth relations turned ugly fast. Starmer spoke plainly. The monarchy must modernise its messaging on immigration and diversity. Clinical, controlled, cold. The Prince of Wales didn't listen. He stood up, looked the Prime Minister in the eye and walked out. The door slammed so hard, aides in the corridor jumped. Security staff who have worked at Downing Street for decades say they have never witnessed a departure like it. Witnesses inside the room insist his words were short, sharp and unforgettable. "I serve the British people, Prime Minister, not your political agenda," he said. "My father warned me about men like you." Then he left. That line, calm, devastating, landed like a verdict. Within 90 minutes, the palace issued a statement so brief and so frosty it cut through every newsroom. The Prince of Wales had a prior engagement that required his immediate attention. Translation for anyone who understands royal protocol. The heir to the throne had just publicly humiliated the head of the elected government. Courtiers speaking on condition of anonymity tell a picture that looks more like a drama than a diplomatic meeting. William was shaking with rage as he climbed into his car. One aide compared his anger to the fury they recalled only once before after his mother's death. The drive back to Kensington Palace was silent. William raised a hand when his private secretary tried to brief him on the following day. He wanted to be left alone to process what had happened. At Kensington, he retreated to his private office for 3 hours. Staff heard a 40-minute phone call with King Charles. What was said remains secret. Palace insiders say the king fully supported his son's decision. That support, public or private, matters. It will shape everything that follows. There's a second, even more explosive layer to this confrontation. Sources in the room say Starmer didn't merely ask for a change in tone. He presented a drafted statement he expected the palace to put out. Language endorsing the government's new immigration framework. The draft reportedly praised recent arrivals for cultural enrichment while dismissing concerns about integration as outdated. Palace lawyers are now combing through that document. William read 3 paragraphs. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. The fury in his face said everything. "You want me to read propaganda?" he asked quietly. "You want the future king to gaslight the British people?" Starmer attempted to explain it was suggested wording, not mandatory. The prince was already at the door. As he reached for the handle, he turned once more. "My grandmother spent 70 years staying above politics. You've just made that impossible." Then the slam. The one that echoed not just in Downing Street but across Westminster. The response was instant. London erupted. Thousands poured into the streets. Westminster looked like the front line of a political hurricane. The prince's words and that door slam became a signal that something fundamental had broken. And not long after, the focus shifted to people most affected by policy, Britain's veterans. These are the men and women who put themselves between this country and danger. The contrast being drawn now is stark and brutal. Veterans waiting months for hip replacements, pensioners choosing cold over food, an 80-year-old with disability support cut by nearly a fifth. These are names and faces. James Patterson from Portsmouth, sleeping on his daughter's sofa while waiting 11 months for a hip. Sarah Mitchell from Glasgow, a former army medic, now reliant on food banks. Their stories are not anecdotes. They are thousands multiplied. The outrage is not hypothetical. Veterans who sacrificed for the Union Jack are being told there isn't money for proper care, while witnesses say people arriving illegally on small boats are getting immediate housing, legal representation and priority medical attention. Heated hotel rooms at taxpayers' expense, 3 meals a day tailored to cultural needs, cash allowances reportedly higher than some state pensions. That contrast, veterans left to fend, newcomers fast-tracked to services, has lit a fuse among voters who once thought loyalty to Labour was a given. Margaret Wilkins, a retired nurse from Leeds and a Labour voter for 47 years, recorded a video that went viral. "I can't support a party that treats foreigners better than our own heroes," she said, her hand shaking. The clip has more than 3 million views. Within hours, thousands of similar testimonies flooded social media. Ordinary Britons saying they feel betrayed. Then the crown moved. King Charles did what no monarch has dared in living memory. He rewrote protocol in public, and he did it at Remembrance. At Westminster Abbey, he delivered what insiders call the most politically charged speech by a British monarch since the abdication crisis. Those who served deserve our eternal gratitude, not bureaucratic excuses, Charles said, voice tight with emotion. When a nation forgets its defenders, it forgets itself. He stared down the issue with a clarity that read as accusation. The optics were devastating for Keir Starmer. He sat in the front row like a man attending his own eulogy. Royal historians flagged the speech immediately. Charles had sided with veterans against government policy without technically breaking constitutional neutrality. Palace aides say the king personally rewrote the speech at 2 a.m, excising softer language suggested by advisers. The Archbishop of Canterbury, sitting beside him, later told colleagues he had never seen the monarch so resolved, so ready to risk convention for principle. Television cameras captured it in stark contrast, royal dignity against political discomfort. The moment resonated beyond our borders. International actors weighed in. Justin Trudeau warned that constitutional monarchy requires mutual respect between Crown and government. Peter Dutton in Australia, where Republican sentiment stirs from time to time, defended the British Crown with a blunt line: if this is how the government treats the royals, thank God we still have the Crown to protect constitutional order. The Irish Times editorialised. Monarchist groups rallied in Paris. From Tokyo to Toronto, the world watched and largely sided with the palace. That global tilt magnified the humiliation. American right-wing media seized the narrative with relish. Left-leaning outlets, too, covered the crisis with a tone that suggested sympathy for the royals. The markets reacted as if this were not merely a political spat, but a signal of instability. The pound dipped sharply within minutes of William's departure. The FTSE 100 lost billions as investors jittered over constitutional uncertainty. Back in Whitehall, inside number 10, the atmosphere turned toxic. Ministers shouted at one another. Folders flew across cabinet tables. Names were whispered in WhatsApp groups titled Save the Party, an emergency coalition. MPs openly discussed leadership timings. Resignations were rumoured. 3 junior ministers were suggested as ready to follow a single cabinet defection. Senior MPs began to distance themselves, leaking different versions of the Downing Street meeting to sympathetic papers, and then came a leak that could blow the whole thing sky high. Documents from inside the Home Office, if genuine, suggest Starmer's team discussed cutting royal ceremonial budgets by 40% to redirect funds to immigration services. If true, it shifts this from a diplomatic rupture to an existential threat. The idea that the Prime Minister might plan to defund the monarchy while standing at state dinners praising the King reads as hypocrisy so severe it could topple a government. Constitutional lawyers warn of old powers never used in modern times. Some suggest the monarch retains prerogative options that, in extremis, could dissolve Parliament. Cambridge legal scholars point to centuries-old tools now dusted off by panic. The last time such machinery almost turned is a date from the 19th century. If those lines are crossed, we are not in a crisis. We are in uncharted territory. The scene has become a chessboard. Rishi Sunak, quietly measured, showed up at a veterans event and spoke to thunderous applause. He did not need to name Starmer. The contrast was obvious, a leader honouring service while the Prime Minister fights with the palace. Polls, volatile in crisis, but began to move. Conservatives climbed, Labour fell. Betting markets tilted, but the key question looms larger than numbers. Has Keir Starmer committed political suicide by disrespecting the royal family, or has Prince William overstepped by walking out on an elected Prime Minister? Is King Charles preparing to exercise reserve powers? Will we see a move that forces an election? The next 3 days are crucial. Every camera will be trained on William this Friday at a Commonwealth Youth event. Every expression will be read. The palace insists any remarks will be carefully vetted, pushing boundaries without crossing them. Downing Street braces for Prime Minister's questions, where the opposition will hunt for blood. The machinery of government creaks and groans. Confidence votes are quietly being organised. Backbenchers circulate, whispers like knives. The air smells of an ending. Inside Downing Street, the tension is thick enough to choke on. Senior aides describe scenes of shouting matches echoing through rooms built for diplomacy, not chaos. One official says the building feels less like the seat of government and more like the set of a political disaster film. The once disciplined Labour machine is now a battlefield of competing egos and fraying nerves. Every hour brings another leak, another betrayal, another resignation threat. Angela Rayner reportedly lost her temper during a late-night cabinet session, throwing a folder across the table in fury as she accused colleagues of surrendering control of the party's message. Papers scattered across the floor. No one dared move to collect them. Foreign Secretary David Lammy, usually the voice of calm, was overheard muttering to a colleague, "This is worse than anything we faced in opposition. At least then we weren't destroying ourselves." His despair summed up the mood. Inside Labour's private WhatsApp groups, panic has turned to plotting. The names of potential successors are traded like political currency. There's no subtlety left. MPs are openly discussing leadership challenges, vote timings and loyalty swaps. The group names themselves tell the story. Save the Party, Emergency Coalition. The conspiracies are no longer whispered. They're being typed, time-stamped and screenshotted. Transport Secretary Louise Haigh was seen leaving a cabinet meeting, visibly shaken. Colleagues say she looked pale, avoided eye contact and left the moment Starmer stopped speaking. By the following morning, sources close to her were suggesting a resignation letter was already being drafted, one that could trigger a cascade of exits within hours. Health Secretary Wes Streeting, once Starmer's most trusted ally, has gone completely silent. No television appearances, no radio interviews. His team is unavailable for comment. Political insiders know what that means. He's waiting for the right moment to strike. Veteran Labour backbencher Barry Gardiner became the first to break publicly. In an unannounced press conference, he refused to defend Starmer's handling of the royal fallout. When reporters pressed him, he simply shook his head and walked away. That image, silent defiance, looped on every channel for the rest of the day. It was the kind of moment that shifts tides. Meanwhile, the leaks keep coming. The Telegraph published 3 conflicting versions of what supposedly happened in the meeting with William, each story sourced to a different cabinet minister, each trying to push blame elsewhere. One senior journalist called it a circular firing squad wearing red rosettes. And then came the leak that threatens to bring the government down altogether. Home Office documents suggesting Starmer's team had discussed slashing royal ceremonial budgets by 40% to redirect funds to immigration services. If genuine, it's a betrayal of breathtaking proportions. To even contemplate cutting royal funds while publicly praising the monarchy's service is political suicide. Constitutional experts say such a move could trigger ancient royal prerogative powers. Mechanisms of last resort that haven't been used since the early 19th century. Cambridge professor Helena Thornberry told the BBC that if Downing Street really attempted to defund the monarchy, King Charles could invoke emergency authority to dissolve Parliament entirely. We would be in uncharted territory, she warned. It would be a constitutional earthquake. Legal historians are already dusting off precedents from the 1830s to see what happens when the Crown is threatened by its own government. The conclusions aren't comforting. At Westminster, MPs whisper the unthinkable. Could the King actually end the government? And if he did, who could stop him? While Labour spirals into self-destruction, Rishi Sunak has quietly moved to claim the moral high ground. At a veterans' charity event in Southampton, he stood before a packed hall of service members and declared, "Britain's greatness was built by those who served, not those who lecture." The applause lasted nearly a minute. He never once mentioned Starmer, but he didn't have to. The contrast was obvious. Starmer fighting the monarchy, Sunak honouring it. One man consumed by crisis, the other radiating calm authority. The effect was instant. Polls swung overnight. The Conservatives surged to 36%, their highest since the last general election. Labour collapsed to 24. Reform UK, powered by Nigel Farage's relentless populist energy, sits at 21%, bleeding the working class base that once made Labour unbeatable. Britain is watching a political realignment happen in real time. Farage, sensing the moment, launched emergency town halls across 20 constituencies. His message is brutal in its simplicity. They chose migrants over veterans, ideology over tradition, themselves over the country. It's a line that cuts deep, and the response has been ferocious. Reform UK gained 12,000 new members in 4 days. Donation websites crashed under the pressure. Former Labour heartlands are suddenly in play. Meanwhile, inside Labour headquarters, panic has turned to paralysis. Staff whisper about Friday as if it's a deadline for survival. 3 separate confidence votes are reportedly being drafted by rival factions. The party's National Executive Committee meets Thursday in what insiders describe as a make-or-break showdown. Starmer's allies are trying to shore up support, but even loyalists admit morale is collapsing. It feels like the final days, one advisor told Sky News, and all of this unfolds with the nation watching in real time, every moment dissected on talk shows, every leak amplified on social media. The British public isn't just witnessing a scandal. They're witnessing the disintegration of a government under the weight of its own arrogance. But the clock is still ticking toward Friday, when Prince William is scheduled to appear at a Commonwealth youth event. Cameras will capture everything. Every expression, every pause, every line. Insiders hint that his remarks have been meticulously crafted to push the limits of royal neutrality without breaching it. The palace knows the stakes. One wrong word could be interpreted as direct condemnation of the government. Meanwhile, at Westminster, Starmer prepares for Prime Minister's questions. It could be his last as party leader. Conservative MPs are said to be preparing questions designed to humiliate him on live television. His own backbenchers are sharpening knives, waiting for him to stumble. Britain is holding its breath. The monarchy has made its move. The markets have spoken. The people have taken to the streets. And now the question echoing through the corridors of power is the same one whispered in pubs, offices and living rooms across the country. How much longer can Keir Starmer survive? By Thursday morning, Westminster was on the brink. The streets outside Parliament were a sea of flags and fury. Veterans marching shoulder to shoulder with ordinary Britons chanting Starmer out as traffic came to a standstill. Police in riot gear lined Whitehall, their radios crackling with tension. For the first time in decades, London felt like a capital teetering on the edge of something far greater than politics. It felt like a reckoning. Inside the Palace of Westminster, Labour MPs moved through corridors like ghosts, avoiding cameras and one another. Nobody wanted to be seen defending the Prime Minister. Nobody wanted to go down with the ship. Keir Starmer, once hailed as the sober face of competence, now looked like a man cornered by history. Those around him say he barely sleeps. His phone vibrates with messages he no longer answers. His inner circle has shrunk to a handful of loyalists who still believe there's a way out. But every hour brings a new headline, a new leak, another resignation threat. At midday, the first of the confidence. Letters went in. The trigger for what could become an official leadership challenge. 3 factions are already fighting over who gets to replace him if he falls. West Streeting, once silent, is now emerging as the acceptable face of Labour's recovery bid. Others push for Yvette Cooper or Lisa Nandy. Behind closed doors, promises are being made. Careers traded like poker chips, each one betting that Starmer won't last the week. Meanwhile, the public mood has hardened. Overnight polling shows a majority of Britons now believe the monarchy, not the government, acted with integrity during the confrontation. The hashtag #RoyalRebellion has passed 60 million views across platforms. Commentators are calling it a cultural earthquake, a shift in the emotional foundations of the country. The monarchy, once seen as a relic of the past, has become the moral centre of the nation's outrage. And then came the next tremor. Early Friday morning, the BBC confirmed that King Charles and Prince William had held an unscheduled audience at Windsor. No aides, no notes, just father and son behind closed doors for over an hour. What they discussed remains private, but one palace insider described the atmosphere as historic. The implication was clear. Decisions of enormous constitutional weight were on the table. That same morning, as Westminster braced for fallout, Rishi Sunak made a quiet appearance in Bristol. No fanfare, no press stagecraft. He simply visited a community centre supporting veterans. Cameras caught him shaking hands with ex-servicemen, thanking them for their service, listening intently as they spoke. The footage went viral within minutes. One clip showing a tearful veteran telling Sunak, "You're the first politician who's actually listened," has been viewed 10 million times. The contrast with Starmer's silence was lethal. By Friday afternoon, the markets were in free fall. Sterling hit a 3-year low. The FTSE shared another 18 billion in a single session. International investors were pulling out of London, not because of policy, but because of perception. Britain looked unstable. Newspapers from Washington to Berlin ran headlines warning of a constitutional implosion in the UK. In Ottawa, Justin Trudeau urged respect for institutions. In Canberra, Peter Dutton called it a cautionary tale of arrogance meeting history. The world was watching Britain unravel. And then, just as the storm reached its peak, Prince William stepped onto the stage at the Commonwealth Youth event. The cameras fell silent. Every journalist in the room leaned forward. His speech began softly, almost understated, but his message built like a drumbeat. "Our duty," he said, "is not to any one government, but to the people of this country. It is to its unity, its decency, and its sense of honour." The crowd erupted. It wasn't just a speech, it was a statement of identity. And every word felt aimed at Downing Street. The footage played across every channel. Commentators called it the speech that drew a line. Constitutional scholars called it the most careful rebellion in royal history. For millions of Britons, it sounded like the return of a voice they thought politics had forgotten. The voice of moral conviction. Within hours, resignations started to snowball. Louise Haig's letter landed first, citing a loss of confidence in leadership. 3 junior ministers followed. By evening, Labour's internal vote count had crossed the threshold. Keir Starmer faced an official leadership challenge. His allies begged him to fight on, but it was clear the game was over. The Prime Minister who tried to lecture the monarchy was now being dragged down by his own party. And yet the most dangerous move may still lie ahead. Constitutional lawyers now whisper about a soft intervention. A private message from the palace urging stability, hinting that the King's patience is not infinite. One source described it bluntly. If the government collapses completely, the Crown will act. Whether that means dissolving Parliament or nudging towards an election, nobody knows. But the mere suggestion that the monarch could step in has sent shockwaves through Westminster. By midnight, as the rain swept over Downing Street, television crews gathered outside Number 10. Reporters whispered that Starmer's resignation was imminent. Inside, the curtains remained drawn. No statement, no movement, just silence. The kind that fills the air before history turns a page. Across the city at Kensington Palace, the lights were still on. A senior aide confirmed William was awake, monitoring events closely. In Buckingham Palace, Charles was said to be calm but resolute. The monarchy had weathered political tempests before, but not like this. Not in an age of live-streamed politics and digital revolt. And so Britain stands at a crossroads tonight. One path leads to reform and renewal, the other to chaos and collapse. A Prime Minister's career hangs by a thread. A monarchy once accused of irrelevance now commands the moral high ground. And the people, the same British public so often dismissed as apathetic, have roared back to life. Tomorrow may bring a resignation. It may bring an election. Or it may bring something Britain hasn't seen in centuries, a monarch stepping into the breach. Either way, the nation will never be the same again.